There are certain rules that exist not to protect those who follow them, but to protect those who create them. On the Belmont estate in Warren County, Mississippi, there was one rule that stood above all others, enforced with a severity that made even the overseer uncomfortable. No worker, under any circumstance for any reason, was permitted to set foot inside the East Wing's locked room on the second floor. The penalty for attempting entry was immediate removal from the property, not reassignment, not a whipping, removal, complete and permanent. What made grown men follow this rule without question wasn't the threat itself. It was the look in Master Belmont's eyes when he spoke of it, a look that suggested the punishment would be a mercy compared to what waited beyond that door. This is what happened when that rule was broken. March 1861 arrived in Warren County with an unseasonable cold that made the Mississippi River fog rise thick as cotton. The Belmont Plantation sprawled across 800 acres of prime bottomland, its main house standing 3 stories tall with white columns that caught the morning light like bone. 47 people lived and worked on the Belmont estate. 32 were enslaved workers who tended the cotton fields, the household, the stables, and the orchards. 15 were white, the Belmont family, their overseer, and various hired hands who came and went with the seasons. The estate operated with mechanical precision under the direction of Master Thomas Belmont, a man of 43 years who'd inherited the property from his father in 1854. Thomas was known throughout Warren County as a man of peculiar habits. He took his breakfast at precisely 6 o'clock each morning. He walked the same route through his property every afternoon at 3. He spoke little and smiled less. His wife, Constance, had died in 1858 under circumstances the family physician described as a sudden fever. Their 2 children, a daughter named Margaret, aged 16, and a son named Thomas Jr., aged 13, lived in the main house but were rarely seen outside its walls. Margaret had been educated by private tutors and had not attended any social gathering in over 2 years. The boy was described by the few who'd seen him as delicate in constitution. The overseer, a man named Hugh Garrett, had worked at Belmont for 6 years. He was known as fair by the brutal standards of the time. He rarely used the whip, and never without what he considered justification. But Hugh Garrett had one instruction that he delivered to every new worker, hired hand, and visiting tradesman with absolute solemnity. The East Wing's second floor. The door at the end of the hallway. You go nowhere near it. You don't look at it. You don't speak of it. And if you value your life and your position, you don't ask questions about it. The door itself was unremarkable. Solid oak, like many others in the house, with a brass handle that had tarnished to a dull green. What made it noteworthy was its location and its lock. The east wing of the second floor was rarely used. 4 bedrooms lined the hallway, all of them unoccupied, their furniture covered with white sheets that had yellowed with age. The windows remained shuttered year-round, leaving the corridor in permanent twilight even at midday. The locked room sat at the hallway's end, its door fitted with 3 separate locks, an unusual arrangement that several people had noted, but none had questioned aloud. Master Belmont carried the keys on a chain he wore inside his vest, never removing it even when he slept. Twice per week on Tuesday and Friday afternoons, Master Belmont would climb the east wing stairs alone. He carried with him a canvas bag whose contents remained a mystery. He would unlock the 3 locks, enter the room, and close the door behind him. He remained inside for exactly 2 hours. When he emerged, his face held an expression that the house servants learned to recognize, a mixture of exhaustion and something darker, something that resembled satisfaction, but wasn't quite. The canvas bag, when he carried it back downstairs, appeared lighter than when he'd brought it up. No one cleaned the east wing. No one opened the shutters. No one entered any of those 4 bedrooms or set foot in that hallway, unless Master Belmont specifically called them to do so, which happened perhaps 3 times per year, always for some minor repair to the stairwell or a window frame far from the locked door itself. The prohibition was absolute, and for 6 years it had been followed without exception. Samuel was 19 years old in March of 1861, born on the Belmont estate to parents who'd been sold away when he was 7. He'd spent his entire life within the plantation's boundaries and knew every building, every path, every hidden corner of the property. He worked primarily in the stables and the orchards, and he'd developed a reputation for being quick-minded and reliable. Hugh Garrett trusted him with tasks that required initiative, repairing fences without supervision, delivering messages to neighboring properties, managing the feeding schedules for the horses. On the morning of March 14, 1861, Samuel was sent to repair a section of roof on the main house where winter storms had loosened several shingles. The work required access through an attic crawl space that opened onto the 3rd floor. The accident happened because of a rotten beam. Samuel was crossing the attic with his tools when the wood beneath his feet gave way. He fell through the ceiling into a 2nd-floor hallway, landing hard on his shoulder with debris raining down around him. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs and sent pain shooting through his arm. When his vision cleared and he looked around to assess the damage, his blood went cold. He was lying in the east wing hallway, 10 feet from the locked door. The immediate panic that seized Samuel had nothing to do with his injury. He scrambled to his feet despite the pain in his shoulder, his only thought to get out of the hallway before anyone discovered him there. But as he moved toward the stairs, he heard something that made him freeze. A sound was coming from behind the locked door. It was quiet, so quiet that had he been moving, he would have missed it entirely. But in the silence of the shuttered hallway, it was unmistakable. Someone was crying. Not weeping, not sobbing. The sound was too controlled for that. It was the soft, steady breathing of someone who'd been crying for so long that they'd run out of tears, the kind of sound that spoke of exhaustion rather than grief. Samuel stood motionless, his heart hammering. The crying continued, never growing louder, never stopping. And beneath it, barely audible, he heard another sound, a rhythmic creaking as if someone was rocking back and forth in a chair. He knew he should run. Every instinct screamed at him to get out of that hallway. But something kept him frozen in place, not curiosity exactly, but a kind of horrified fascination. The crying stopped. In the sudden silence, Samuel heard footsteps. Light footsteps, moving closer to the door from the inside. He ran. Samuel told no one about the incident. He reported the roof damage and the fallen beam to Hugh Garrett, showing his injured shoulder as evidence of the accident. He said nothing about where he'd landed or what he'd heard. For 3 days, he tried to convince himself he'd imagined the sounds. The hallway had been dark. He'd been disoriented from the fall. His mind had played tricks on him. But on the 4th day, he made a mistake. He was working in the stable with an older man named Joseph, who'd been on the Belmont estate for over 20 years. Joseph was grooming one of the horses when Samuel, after a long silence, asked the question he'd been fighting not to ask. Joseph, the room in the east wing, the one nobody goes near, how long has it been locked? Joseph's hands stopped moving. He didn't turn around. For a long moment, the only sound was the horse shifting its weight and the distant call of crows in the fields. "Don't," Joseph said finally, his voice low. "Don't ask about that room. Don't think about that room. And don't never speak of it again. No." Joseph turned now, his face grave. "Listen to me, boy. There are things on this estate that are better left alone. That room is one of them. You understand? Master Belmont, he ain't like other men. There's something in him that's broken, something that got twisted up long ago. And that room, whatever's in it, is part of that brokenness. But if someone's in there..." Joseph's eyes widened. "You heard something?" It wasn't a question. Samuel's silence was answer enough. "Oh, Lord." Joseph set down his grooming brush, his hands trembling slightly. "You fell through that ceiling, didn't you? The one they've been talking about fixing. You landed in the east wing." Samuel nodded. "And you heard something from inside the room." Another nod. Joseph closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked older than his years. You can't tell nobody else, you hear me? Not Hugh Garrett, not the other workers, nobody. And you got to put it out of your mind. Whatever you heard, whatever you think you heard, you got to forget about it. How can I forget about it if someone's suffering in there? Because, Joseph said, and his voice was harder now, colder. There ain't nothing you can do about it. There ain't nothing any of us can do. And if you try, if you even look like you're thinking about trying, Master Belmont will know. And then you'll disappear, just like the others. Samuel felt ice in his stomach. What others? Joseph turned back to the horse, his shoulders tight. I've said too much already. Just forget about it, Samuel, for your own sake. But Samuel couldn't forget. Joseph's words had only deepened the mystery. What others? Who had disappeared? He began paying attention in a way he never had before. He watched Master Belmont's routines with new eyes. He noticed things that had always been there, but had never registered as significant. The Tuesday and Friday afternoon visits to the locked room, always exactly 2 hours, always with the canvas bag. The way Margaret Belmont sometimes stood at her bedroom window on the opposite wing, staring toward the east wing with an expression Samuel couldn't quite read. Not fear exactly, more like resignation. The fact that Master Belmont never entertained guests anymore. The house that had once hosted elaborate dinners and social gatherings now stood silent, its grand dining room unused, its parlor doors closed. And something else, something Samuel discovered by accident while organizing supplies in the storage room beneath the kitchen, medical supplies, large quantities of them. Bandages, bottles of laudanum, carbolic acid for disinfection, several mysterious bottles with handwritten labels in Latin that Samuel couldn't read. The quantities were far beyond what any household would need for normal accidents and illnesses. Someone was being treated for something, regularly, long-term. Samuel made a decision that he knew was dangerous but couldn't resist. He would watch the East Wing at night. The main house had several architectural features that made this possible. An old oak tree grew close to the building's eastern side, its branches nearly touching the second-floor shutters. From a position in that tree, Samuel could observe the East Wing windows without being seen from the ground. He chose a moonless night in late March, waiting until well after midnight, when the entire estate had gone dark. Moving silently through the shadows, he climbed the oak tree and settled into a position where he could see the shuttered windows of the East Wing. For an hour, nothing happened. Samuel began to feel foolish, wondering what exactly he'd expected to see. Then light appeared. A faint glow filtered through the cracks in the shutters of the locked room. Someone had lit a lamp inside. Samuel's breath caught. He pressed closer to the trunk, barely daring to breathe, his eyes fixed on that thin line of light. Shadows moved behind the shutters. 2 shadows, one taller, one shorter. The taller shadow moved with purpose, crossing back and forth in front of the window. The shorter shadow remained still, positioned near what Samuel guessed was the far wall. The shadows remained for perhaps 20 minutes. Then the light went out, plunging the wing back into darkness. Samuel remained in the tree for another hour, but the light didn't return. Finally, stiff with cold and fear, he climbed down and made his way back to the quarters. He'd confirmed something important. Master Belmont visited the room at night as well as during his scheduled afternoon hours, and whoever was in that room wasn't alone. The encounter happened on a Tuesday morning in early April. Samuel was carrying firewood to the main house kitchen when he nearly collided with Margaret Belmont in the narrow rear hallway. She stepped back quickly, her eyes downcast in the way she'd been trained. At 16, Margaret had the pale, almost translucent complexion of someone who spent very little time outdoors. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her dress, though made of fine fabric, hung loosely on her thin frame. "I'm sorry, miss," Samuel said, stepping aside. Margaret nodded and moved to pass him. Then she stopped. "You're Samuel," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes, miss." She glanced down the hallway, checking that they were alone. When she looked back at him, her expression had changed. The downcast obedience was gone, replaced by something that looked like desperation. "You fell through the ceiling," she whispered. 3 weeks ago. You landed in the East Wing. Samuel's heart began to pound. Don't lie, I saw you. I was in my room and I heard the crash. I looked out and saw you running from that hallway. She took a step closer, her voice urgent now. Did you hear anything? From the room? Samuel knew he should deny it. Every survival instinct told him to lie. But looking into Margaret's eyes, he saw something that made him answer truthfully. I heard crying. Margaret's face went white. For a moment Samuel thought she might faint. Then she steadied herself, one hand gripping the wall. How long has... Samuel began. Don't ask me that. Don't ask me anything, I can't. She stopped, struggling with some internal decision. Then, my father is not well. He hasn't been well for a very long time. What's in that room, it's a sickness. Not of the body, of the mind. And there's nothing any of us can do about it. But if someone is suffering, she's beyond suffering now, Margaret said, and the words came out like a sob she'd been holding back for years. She's beyond everything, and the kindest thing anyone can do is leave her in peace. She, Samuel whispered. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I've said too much. Please, forget what you heard, forget this conversation, and whatever you do, stay away from that room. She hurried away, leaving Samuel standing alone in the hallway, his mind reeling. News of Fort Sumter's attack reached Warren County on April 15, 1861. Mississippi had already seceded from the Union, and now war was official. The plantation buzzed with speculation and fear. What would war mean for them? Would Union forces march through Mississippi? Would the enslaved workers be freed? Would the plantation survive? Master Belmont called a gathering of all the estate's workers and staff on the morning of April 16th. He stood on the main house veranda, his face grave, and delivered a speech that Samuel would remember for the rest of his life. Warren County will be called upon to defend the state and the cause. I will be making arrangements to supply provisions to the Confederate forces. The work of this estate will continue as it always has. Our routines will not change. Our rules will not change. And anyone who believes this conflict will alter the order of things under my roof is gravely mistaken. His eyes swept across the assembled crowd, lingering for a moment on Samuel. The rules that govern this property exist for reasons you cannot understand. They will be enforced with greater severity now than ever before. Is that clear? A murmur of assent rose from the crowd. Then return to your work. That evening, Joseph found Samuel behind the stable. He knows, Joseph said without preamble. Samuel felt cold dread wash over him. Knows what? That you've been asking questions, watching. He knows, Samuel. Master Belmont knows everything that happens on this estate, and now, with the war starting, he's going to be even more careful, even more dangerous. I haven't told anyone. It don't matter. He can see it in how you move, how you look at the house. I've seen it happen before. Joseph's voice dropped to barely a whisper. There was a man here 6 years ago before you started working close to the house. Name of Daniel. He was curious too. Started asking questions about that room. Started watching the East Wing. What happened to him? He was transferred, Joseph said. That's what Master Belmont told us. Sold to a plantation in Louisiana. But Daniel's wife was here too, and she swore up and down that her husband would never have left without telling her. She made a fuss about it, went to Hugh Garrett, even tried to talk to Master Belmont directly. Samuel waited, though he already knew the answer. She disappeared 3 days later, also transferred. Both of them gone, and nobody ever heard from them again. And the message was clear. Don't ask about the room, don't question Master Belmont, and don't make trouble. Are you saying he killed them? I'm saying they disappeared. That's all I know, and that's all you need to know to understand why you got to stop this. Whatever curiosity you have, whatever you think you heard, it ain't worth dying for. In mid-April, a carriage arrived at the estate carrying a man Samuel had never seen before. A gray-haired gentleman in his 60s wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather medical bag. Samuel was working near the main house entrance when the visitor arrived. He watched as Master Belmont himself came out to greet the man, shaking his hand with uncharacteristic warmth. "Dr. Pritchard," Belmont said, "thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course, Thomas, though I must say, your message was rather cryptic. Is there an urgent matter? Come inside, we'll discuss it privately." The two men disappeared into the house. The doctor's carriage remained at the front entrance, the driver settling in for what appeared to be a long wait. Samuel continued his work, trying to appear uninterested, but his mind was racing. A doctor's visit, coming at Master Belmont's urgent request. And given the timing and the secrecy, Samuel would have bet everything he owned that the visit concerned the locked room. 2 hours later, Master Belmont and Dr. Pritchard emerged from the house. The doctor looked troubled, his face drawn. Samuel, working on a nearby flower bed, was close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. "Cannot continue indefinitely, Thomas. The strain on you, and on her. It's not your concern how long it continues. I need you to provide the supplies I've requested. I've brought what I can, but Thomas, you must understand. I understand perfectly, and I'll pay whatever price you name. But this is how things will be. Do you accept those terms?" A long pause. Then, "I accept them. God forgive me, but I accept them." The doctor left shortly afterward. Master Belmont stood on the veranda, watching the carriage disappear down the long drive. Then he turned and looked directly at Samuel. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then Master Belmont spoke. "Samuel." "Yes, sir." "Come inside. I have a task for you." Samuel's heart pounded as he followed Master Belmont into the main house. They walked through the grand foyer, past the parlor, toward the staircase that led to the second floor. For one terrifying moment, Samuel thought he was being led to the east wing. But Master Belmont turned the opposite direction at the top of the stairs, heading to his private study. The study was a large room lined with bookshelves, a massive desk dominating the center. Master Belmont closed the door behind them and gestured for Samuel to stand near the desk. "You're an intelligent young man," Belmont said, moving to pour himself a glass of brandy from a decanter. "Hugh Garrett speaks highly of your work. Says you're reliable. Discreet. Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask you to do something that requires both reliability and discretion. Are you capable of that?" "Yes, sir." Belmont took a drink, studying Samuel over the rim of his glass. "There are supplies in the room adjacent to the study. Medical supplies that Dr. Pritchard just delivered. I need them carried to the second floor east wing." The room seemed to tilt. Samuel struggled to keep his expression neutral. "I need them placed just outside the door, at the end of the hallway. Not inside the room, just outside. You'll set them down, knock twice on the door, and leave immediately. You will not wait. You will not look around. You will complete the task and return here to confirm it's done. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Belmont's eyes hardened. "And Samuel, if I find that you've violated my trust in even the smallest way, if you've lingered in that hallway, if you've touched anything you shouldn't, if you've tried to look through the keyhole or under the door, I will know, and the consequences will be severe. Do you understand that as well?" "Yes, sir." The supplies were in a wooden crate, not large, but heavy enough that Samuel had to carry it carefully up the stairs. His hands trembled as he climbed, his mind spinning with questions. Why was Master Belmont allowing him to approach the door? Was this a test? A trap? He reached the second floor and turned toward the east wing. The hallway stretched before him, dark and silent, the shuttered windows letting in only thin bands of grey afternoon light. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as he walked toward the locked door. With each step, his sense of wrongness intensified. The air felt heavier here, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He reached the door and knelt, setting the crate down as quietly as possible. His instructions were clear: knock twice and leave immediately. But as he raised his hand to knock, he heard it again. The sound from inside the room. Not crying this time. Something else. A rhythmic sound like fabric moving. and beneath it, so quiet he almost missed it, a voice. Someone was singing. The melody was broken, the words indistinct, but the voice was unmistakably female, young, and unbearably sad. Samuel's hand froze inches from the door. The singing stopped. Footsteps approached from inside, soft, shuffling footsteps. They stopped just on the other side of the door, so close Samuel could have reached through the wood and touched them. A shadow moved across the thin gap between the door and the floor. Someone was standing right there, listening. Samuel knocked twice, the sound sharp and loud in the silent hallway. Then he ran, not walking, running back toward the stairs, the sound of his footsteps echoing behind him like thunder. Samuel reported the completed task to Master Belmont, who accepted the information with a curt nod and dismissed him. But the experience had shaken Samuel badly. The voice singing in that room had been human, alive, present. Not a ghost or a memory, but a real person, locked away in darkness. He couldn't let it go. That evening he sought out Joseph again. "Please," Samuel said, "just tell me. Who's in that room?" Joseph looked pained. "I don't know. You've been here for 20 years. You must know something. I know what I've been told, that Master Belmont's wife died in 1858, that the children are kept separate from most of the household, that something in this family is broken in a way that can't be fixed." He paused. "And I know that people who ask too many questions disappear." Margaret said, "She's beyond suffering now." Samuel pressed. "Who did she mean? Who is the she?" "Samuel, someone is alive in that room. I heard her singing." Joseph's face went grey. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." For a long moment, Joseph said nothing. Then, "There's an old woman who used to work in the main house, name of Ruth. She got dismissed about 5 years ago, but she lives in a cabin on the northern edge of the property. If anyone knows the truth about that room, it would be her. But Samuel, if you go to her, if you keep pursuing this, there's no turning back. You understand that?" "I understand." "No," Joseph said sadly. "You don't, but you will." Samuel found the cabin the next evening, a small structure half hidden by overgrown vegetation. An old woman sat on the porch smoking a pipe, her eyes sharp despite her age. "You're the boy who's been asking questions," she said before Samuel could speak. "Yes, ma'am. Joseph sent you to me. He said you might know about the locked room." Ruth took a long draw from her pipe, the smoke curling into the twilight. "I know, and knowing has cost me everything I had. You sure you want that burden? I need to know. Why? What difference does knowing make? Can you unlock that door? Can you change what's happened? Can you fix what's broken in that family?" "No, but I can't unknow what I've already learned, and I can't stop wondering." Ruth nodded slowly. "Sit down then, and listen close, because I'm only going to tell this once." Samuel sat. "Master Belmont's wife didn't die in 1858, Ruth began. "That's the story they tell, but it's a lie. Constance Belmont is alive, and she's in that locked room." Samuel felt his blood go cold. "You got to understand," Ruth continued, "Thomas Belmont wasn't always like he is now. When he was younger, before his father died, he was almost normal. Quiet, yes, but not broken. Then he inherited the estate and the responsibility started eating at him. He became obsessed with control, with order, with making sure everything happened exactly as he planned." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "Constance was a good woman, kind. She tried to soften him, tried to keep some warmth in that cold house. But Thomas wouldn't have it. He wanted perfection. And when Constance started showing signs that she wasn't perfect, that's when everything went wrong." "What kind of signs?" "Melancholy. That's what the doctors called it. She'd get spells where she couldn't leave her bed, couldn't stop crying, couldn't seem to find any joy in anything. It got worse after the children were born. Some women get that way. Dr. Pritchard said it was a malady of the mind that affects new mothers sometimes. It would pass, he said, give her time. But it didn't pass. No, it got worse. By 1857, Constance was having episodes where she couldn't recognize her own children. She'd forget who she was, where she was. She'd wander the house at night talking to people who weren't there. Thomas tried to keep it quiet, brought in doctors from New Orleans, specialists who prescribed all manner of treatments. Nothing worked. Ruth's voice grew quieter. Then came the day she tried to hurt herself. Margaret found her mother in the bathing room, and if the child hadn't screamed, well, that was the day Thomas decided Constance couldn't be trusted around the family anymore, that she was a danger, and that she needed to be locked away. He had the East Wing room prepared. Ruth continued. Bars installed on the windows behind the shutters. The locks fitted on the door, a bed bolted to the floor, everything she might use to harm herself removed. And then he moved her in there. But why not send her to an asylum? Because Thomas Belmont couldn't accept the imperfection. Couldn't accept that his family wasn't exactly as he'd planned it to be. If Constance went to an asylum, everyone would know. The whole county would know that his wife had lost her mind. His pride couldn't bear it, so he made his own asylum, right there in his house. Samuel felt sick, and she's been in there ever since. 4 years now. He tends to her himself, brings her food, medicine, keeps her clean. Won't let anyone else near her. Even Margaret and young Thomas aren't allowed to see their mother. Thomas tells them she's dead, that she died in 1858, and they go along with it because they're too afraid to do otherwise. Margaret knows, Samuel said. She told me her mother is beyond suffering. Ruth nodded sadly. Margaret knows. The girl figured it out maybe 2 years ago, heard her mother singing one night, but what can she do? She's 16 years old, powerless, trapped in that house with a father who's lost his reason. She can't free her mother, she can't escape herself, so she pretends. They all pretend. And Dr. Pritchard knows too. Dr. Pritchard has known from the beginning. Thomas pays him well to keep supplying the medicines, laudanum to keep Constance calm, other tonics to keep her alive. The doctor's conscience troubles him, I imagine, but not enough to refuse the money. Samuel sat in silence, trying to process it all. A woman locked in a room for 4 years, hidden from the world, cared for by a husband who'd rather imprison her than admit imperfection. "Why did Master Belmont dismiss you?" he asked. "Because I made the mistake of suggesting that Constance might do better with proper care. That keeping her locked up was making her condition worse, not better. Thomas didn't take kindly to that. I was transferred that same week, though at least he let me stay on the property in this cabin. I suppose he figured I was too old to start over somewhere else, and maybe keeping me close where he could watch me was safer than letting me leave with his secrets." Samuel returned to the quarters that night with a weight on his shoulders that made it hard to breathe. He now knew the truth. The question was, what could he possibly do about it? The options played out in his mind. Tell Hugh Garrett? The overseer would either not believe him, or if he did believe, would likely report the conversation to Master Belmont. Either way, Samuel would be transferred, which, based on Joseph's story, meant something far worse than relocation. Try to free Constance? He didn't have keys. He couldn't overpower Master Belmont. And even if he somehow managed to unlock that door, where would they go? A black man traveling with a white woman who'd been declared dead. They wouldn't make it 10 miles before being caught. Appeal to the authorities? The sheriff of Warren County was Thomas Belmont's friend. The local judge played cards with him monthly. And the law in 1861 Mississippi wasn't particularly concerned with the welfare of a white man's wife, especially when that man was wealthy and influential. Go to Margaret, ask her to help. But Margaret was trapped just as thoroughly as her mother, and asking her to act against her father would only put her in danger. There was no good option, no clear path, no way to fix what was broken. And yet Samuel couldn't unknow what he now knew, couldn't unhear the singing he'd heard, couldn't forget that a woman was suffering in darkness while the world went on pretending she was dead. The war continued to spread throughout the spring of 1861. Warren County organized military companies. Young men enlisted and marched away to training camps in Jackson. The plantation's cotton crop was earmarked for Confederate uniforms. Master Belmont threw himself into support of the war effort, perhaps grateful for the distraction. He attended meetings in Vicksburg, coordinated supply shipments, and made speeches about duty and honor. But his twice-weekly visits to the locked room never stopped. Samuel watched from a distance, tracking the pattern. Tuesday and Friday afternoons, exactly 2 hours. And increasingly, late-night visits as well. The faint glow of lamplight behind the shutters appearing at midnight or later, lasting for 30 minutes to an hour before going dark again. Was Constance getting worse? Was Master Belmont increasing her medications? Or was something else happening in that room? In late May, Samuel witnessed something that troubled him deeply. He was working late in the garden when he saw Master Belmont emerge from the main house, carrying not the usual canvas bag, but a wooden chair. He hauled it up the front stairs and into the house. The next day, when Master Belmont emerged from his scheduled visit to the locked room, he wasn't carrying the chair. It had stayed inside, a new piece of furniture added to the room. But why? June arrived with oppressive heat. The cotton plants grew tall in the fields. The war news grew worse. Battles in Virginia, casualties mounting, the conflict spreading. And Samuel's patience finally broke. He'd spent nearly 3 months wrestling with the knowledge of what was happening in that locked room. 3 months watching Master Belmont maintain his rigid routine while a woman suffered in isolation. 3 months of doing nothing because there was nothing he could do. But knowledge has weight, and eventually that weight becomes unbearable. On the night of June 19, 1861, Samuel made a decision. He couldn't free Constance, but he could at least let her know she wasn't forgotten, that someone knew she was there, that she wasn't completely alone. He waited until after midnight, then crept to the old oak tree beside the east wing. Climbing carefully, he positioned himself level with the shuttered window of the locked room. Light showed through the cracks. Someone was awake inside. Awake. Samuel pulled a small stone from his pocket. He'd chosen it carefully, smooth and light enough not to break glass. He tossed it gently at the shutters. A soft tap. The light inside flickered. Movement. Samuel threw another stone. Another tap. The movement inside grew more agitated. He could see shadows shifting behind the shutters, hear the faint creak of floorboards. He threw a third stone. The shutters moved. Just slightly, someone had pushed against them from inside, testing them. Testing to see if they would open. They didn't. The shutters were latched from the outside, probably nailed shut for additional security. But the movement was enough to confirm that Constance had heard, that she knew someone was out there. Samuel climbed down from the tree, his heart pounding with a strange mixture of accomplishment and guilt. He hadn't helped her, but at least she knew. He didn't see Master Belmont standing at a third-floor window watching. The summons came the next morning. Hugh Garrett found Samuel in the stable, his expression grim. Master Belmont wants to see you, in his study, now. Samuel's blood went cold. He knew. Somehow Master Belmont knew about the stones, the tree, the attempt to communicate with the locked room. He followed Hugh Garrett to the main house, each step feeling like a walk to execution. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, turned down the hallway toward the study. The door was open. Master Belmont sat behind his desk, his face unreadable. "Samuel," he said, "come in. Close the door." Samuel obeyed. Hugh Garrett remained outside. "Sit down." Samuel sat in the chair facing the desk, his mind racing through possible explanations, possible defenses. But looking at Master Belmont's face, he knew that any lie would be useless. "I saw you last night," Belmont said quietly. "In the tree beside the east wing, throwing stones at the window." Samuel said nothing. There was nothing to say. "I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anyone else," Belmont continued. "Not Dr. Pritchard, not Hugh Garrett, not even my own daughter. And I'm going to tell you why you must never interfere with that room again." "My wife is dying," Belmont said. The words came out flat, emotionless. "Has been dying for 4 years now. The melancholy that took her mind is killing her body as well. Dr. Pritchard gives her 6 months at most. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the estate. I loved her once. Does that surprise you? I did. When we married, she was bright and alive and everything I wasn't. I thought she would balance me, soften the hardness in me. Instead, the hardness in me destroyed the softness in her. Samuel remained silent, barely breathing. After she lost her reason, I brought in every specialist I could find. Men from New Orleans, from Charleston, even one from Philadelphia who claimed he could cure madness with magnets and electrical current. Nothing worked. She only grew worse, more lost, more frightened, more absent. Belmont's voice grew quieter. I realized that she was never coming back, that the woman I married was gone, replaced by a stranger who wore her face but couldn't remember our children's names. And I faced a choice: send her to an asylum where she would be treated as a specimen, a curiosity, locked in with dozens of other lost souls in conditions that would horrify you, or keep her here, in her own home, where I could ensure she was cared for with dignity. That's not dignity, Samuel said, the words escaping before he could stop them. That's imprisonment. Belmont turned from the window, his eyes blazing. You think I don't know that? You think I don't see the difference? But tell me, Samuel, what would you have me do? Send her to the state lunatic asylum in Jackson? I've visited that place. I've seen how they treat the patients. Chains, cold baths, neglect. My wife would be dead within a month. She could have visitors, could have light and air. She can't bear visitors, can't bear anything that reminds her of what she's lost. The dark is a mercy for her now. The isolation is a mercy, and the medications keep her from the worst of the terror and confusion. Belmont moved closer, his face intense. You think I'm a monster? Perhaps I am. But everything I do because I don't know what else to do. Because there is no good answer. Because this situation is impossible, and I'm managing it the only way I can. Here is what's going to happen, Master Belmont said, his voice turning cold and businesslike. You're going to forget everything you've heard, everything you've seen, everything you think you know about that room. You're going to return to your work and never speak of this again. And if I don't, then you'll be transferred. And I assure you, where you're transferred to will make the locked room look like paradise. There are plantations in the deep delta where men work until they die, where life expectancy is measured in months, not years. I have connections there. I can make a transfer happen within a week. The threat hung in the air between them. But, Belmont continued, if you agree to my terms, if you demonstrate absolute discretion and loyalty, I will make you a different offer. When this war ends, assuming the Confederacy wins, I will manumit you, give you papers of freedom and enough money to start a new life. Samuel stared at him, unable to believe what he was hearing. I'm not a fool, Belmont said. I know the peculiar institution is not sustainable forever, regardless of what happens with this war. And I know that loyalty, true loyalty, cannot be compelled, only purchased. So I'm purchasing yours. Keep my secret, and you'll have your freedom. Break my trust, and you'll have something much worse than slavery. How do I know you'll keep your word? You don't. You'll have to trust me, just as I'm trusting you not to spread rumors about my wife throughout Warren County. Belmont returned to his desk, sat down. Do we have an agreement? Samuel thought of Constance, locked in darkness, thought of Margaret, trapped in her own way, thought of the impossible situation Belmont had described. Was he telling the truth about the asylum, about trying to protect his wife in the only way he knew how? Or was it all justification, rationalization for cruelty disguised as mercy? Do we have an agreement? Belmont repeated. Yes, Samuel said, the word tasting like ash. We have an agreement. Summer dragged on. The war news grew more ominous. Battles at Bull Run, federal blockades tightening around southern ports. Talk of a long conflict rather than the quick victory the Confederates had anticipated. Samuel kept his word. He didn't speak to anyone about the locked room. Didn't climb the oak tree again. didn't ask questions, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. He watched Master Belmont's twice-weekly visits with new eyes now, watched the man climb those stairs with his canvas bag, spend his 2 hours in the locked room, and emerge looking exhausted and aged. Was Belmont telling the truth? Was he genuinely trying to care for his wife as best he could in an impossible situation? Or was he a jailer who'd convinced himself that his prison was actually mercy? Samuel couldn't decide, and the not knowing ate at him. In late July, he saw Dr. Pritchard return to the estate. The visit lasted longer this time, nearly 4 hours. When the doctor emerged, he looked shaken. He and Master Belmont stood on the veranda in intense conversation, their voices too low for Samuel to hear. After the doctor left, Master Belmont climbed the stairs to the east wing, but this time he stayed for less than 30 minutes. When he came back down, he was carrying the chair he'd brought up weeks earlier. Something had changed. On the night of August 3rd, 1861, Samuel woke to an unusual sound. A carriage arriving at the main house well after midnight. He rose and looked out the window of the quarters. Lamplight blazed in the main house, far more lights than usual, and the carriage at the entrance belonged to Dr. Pritchard. Something was happening. Samuel dressed quickly and slipped outside. He moved through the shadows toward the main house, staying out of sight, watching. Dr. Pritchard emerged from the house twice to retrieve items from his carriage. His medical bag, then a larger case Samuel didn't recognize. Both times the doctor moved with urgent purpose. Hugh Garrett appeared, roused from his own quarters. He spoke briefly with Dr. Pritchard, then stationed himself at the main house entrance as if standing guard. The vigil continued for hours. Samuel waited in the shadows, unable to look away, knowing that whatever was happening in that locked room was reaching some kind of culmination. Near dawn, Margaret appeared at a third-floor window. She stood there motionless, her white nightgown ghostly in the pre-dawn light, staring toward the east wing. As the sun rose, Dr. Pritchard finally emerged from the house. Master Belmont walked him to the carriage. The two men spoke for several minutes, then shook hands. As the doctor's carriage pulled away, Master Belmont stood on the veranda, his face grey with exhaustion. Then he walked slowly back into the house. Samuel knew, though no one had spoken a word. Constance Belmont was dead. The announcement came later that morning. Master Belmont gathered the household and workers to inform them that Dr. Pritchard had been called to attend to young Thomas, who'd taken ill with a fever. The boy was recovering, but it had been a difficult night. No mention of Constance, no mention of the locked room, no mention of anything out of the ordinary. Life on the estate continued exactly as it had before, but Samuel noticed changes. Small ones, but significant. Master Belmont no longer made his Tuesday and Friday visits to the east wing. The canvas bag disappeared from his routine. Margaret's face, which had held a constant tension for as long as Samuel had known her, seemed to soften slightly, as if some burden had been lifted. 3 days after the night vigil, a carriage arrived carrying a plain wooden coffin. It was carried into the house through a rear entrance, quickly, with minimal ceremony. That night, well after dark, the same carriage departed with the coffin inside. No funeral, no burial on the property, no death notice in the local newspaper. Constance Belmont, who'd officially died in 1858, could not die again in 1861. The question haunted Samuel: where had they taken her body? Would she be buried under a false name? Or would she simply disappear, unmarked and unmourned, into an anonymous grave somewhere? A week after Constance's death, Master Belmont ordered the locked room cleaned and cleared. Margaret supervised the work herself. She insisted on it, in fact, in the first act of direct defiance against her father that anyone had witnessed. Master Belmont acquiesced, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of exhaustion. Samuel was not involved in the cleaning, but he heard about it from others. The room, they said, was sparse. A bed bolted to the floor, the mattress thin and stained. A small table, a chamber pot, bars on the windows behind the shutters, no mirrors, no sharp objects. Nothing that could be used as a weapon. But there were other things too. Things that suggested the room had held more than just a prisoner. Hundreds of pages of writing, scattered across every surface. Constance had written. On paper when she had it. On the walls when she didn't. Some of it was coherent. Letters to her children that she could never send. Diary entries chronicling her days. Pleas to God for release. Some of it was the rambling confusion of a broken mind. Fragments of songs, repeated phrases, meaningless strings of words. Margaret had all of it collected and burned. Every page, every scrap. She watched as the papers went into the fireplace, making sure nothing remained. She deserves to be remembered as she was before, Margaret told the house servant who'd helped with the cleaning. Not as she became. Summer turned to autumn. The war ground on with no end in sight. Warren County sent more men to fight. The plantation's cotton crop was harvested and shipped to Confederate depots. Master Belmont seemed to age years in the space of months. The rigid precision of his routines began to slip. He missed meals, forgot appointments, spent hours sitting in his study staring at nothing. Young Thomas grew stronger, ironically, as if his mother's death had released him from some sympathetic illness. He began spending time outdoors, learning to ride, showing interest in the management of the estate. And Margaret began to change in ways that surprised everyone. She started taking over household management duties that her father had previously controlled. She spoke to Hugh Garrett directly about estate matters. She even, on one memorable occasion, countermanded one of her father's orders regarding the punishment of a worker who'd broken a tool. Master Belmont, surprisingly, didn't object. It was as if some essential force inside him had broken along with his wife's death, and he no longer had the energy to maintain the absolute control he'd once demanded. The locked room remained empty. The door stood open now, the locks removed. Sunlight streamed through the windows where Margaret had ordered the shutters torn down. It was just a room. Nothing supernatural. Nothing mystical. Just a room where a woman had been kept in darkness for 4 years until she died. September brought cooler weather and a visit that Samuel had been anticipating with dread. Master Belmont summoned him to the study. "Samuel," Belmont said when he arrived, "I owe you something." He opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a leather pouch. "Your freedom papers, properly notarized and legal, and $500 in gold, enough to start a new life wherever you choose to go." Samuel stared at the pouch, unable to move. "I'm keeping my word," Belmont continued. "You maintained discretion about my wife. You kept her dignity even after you knew the truth, and now I'm giving you what I promised. You're free to leave this estate whenever you wish." Samuel slowly took the pouch, feeling its weight in his hands. Freedom, real freedom, everything he'd ever wanted. "There's no obligation to stay," Belmont said. "Though if you choose to remain and work for wages, you'd be welcome. The decision is yours." Samuel looked at the man across the desk. Thomas Belmont was no longer the rigid, controlling figure he'd been 6 months ago. He looked broken, hollowed out, barely holding himself together. "Did you love her?" Samuel asked. "Your wife. Did you really love her? Or was the locked room just about your pride?" Belmont was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know anymore. I thought I was protecting her, protecting all of us. But now, I don't know what I was doing. I only know that it's over, and I have to find a way to live with what I've done." Samuel thought about Ruth's words, about Margaret's face at the window, about the sound of crying he'd heard from behind that locked door. "I'll stay," he said finally. "For now. But I'm staying as a free man working for wages, and if I choose to leave, I'll leave." "I understand," Belmont said. "And Master Belmont?" "Yes. The locked room, what you did. You say you don't know if it was love or pride. But I think you do know. And I think that's the real prison you're living in now." Belmont's face crumpled slightly. He nodded, unable to speak. Samuel left the study, the freedom papers in his pocket, and walked out into the autumn afternoon. The war continued for another 4 years. The Confederacy fell in 1865, and with it, the institution of slavery. Samuel's freedom papers, obtained in 1861, became a historical curiosity. He'd been free for years before emancipation. He left the Belmont estate in 1866, using the gold Master Belmont had given him to purchase land in Tennessee and start a new life. He married, raised children, and lived to see the new century. He never forgot the locked room. Margaret Belmont eventually left Mississippi as well. She moved to Charleston in 1867 and quietly reinvented herself, never speaking of her family or her past. She worked as a teacher, never married, and died in 1903. Master Thomas Belmont died in 1869, alone in his study. The estate was sold to pay debts. The new owners converted it to a boarding house, then later to apartments. The building was torn down in 1934. The locked room, the bars on the windows, the stories whispered by those who'd worked there. All of it became local legend, distorted and embellished over time until no one could separate truth from fiction. But Samuel knew the truth. And sometimes, late in his life, he would tell the story to his grandchildren. Not as a ghost story or a tale of horror, but as a reminder of something darker and more real. That sometimes, the greatest cruelties are committed not out of hate, but out of love twisted into something unrecognizable. That good intentions can build prisons. And that the locked room wasn't a supernatural mystery at all. It was simply what happens when control becomes more important than compassion, when pride overtakes mercy, and when a man decides that his version of protection is worth more than another person's freedom. The room was never haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by choices, and those hauntings are the ones that last the longest.